Chapter 6. Somerville and Norton, 1924. Norton decided that 2 pairs of climbers would try to reach the summit without oxygen. Mallory and Geoffrey Bruce would go first, and Norton and Somerville would follow the next day. The climbers would find a place for Camp 5 above 7,600 metres, and for Camp 6 at 8,231 metres. Adele and Irvine would go up to Camp 4 to help the climbers when they came down. On the 1st of June, Mallory and Bruce climbed up to Camp 4 with 9 porters. The next day was clear and sunny, but above the North Col they met a terrible icy wind. It was difficult to stand, hardly possible to walk. Only 5 porters continued with Mallory and Bruce. At 7,600 metres, they found a place for 2 small tents on a steep slope. Camp 5. All that night they shivered in their sleeping bags, while the wind tried to blow their tents into the air. Next morning they were all ill. Only 1 porter was able to go on. Sadly, they decided to come down. As they went down, they passed Norton and Somerville, with 4 more porters coming up. These men reached Camp 5 and spent a better night there. The wind was less strong, and they managed to cook, eat, and sleep. It was very, very cold, and in the thin air, with no oxygen, it was difficult to move. But next morning, 3 porters, Napbu Yishe, Lapka Chedi, and Semchumbi, were ready to go on. They climbed on, up to 8,170 metres, higher than any man had been before. Here, at 1:30 p.m., they put up 1 tiny tent, Camp 6. Then the porters went down to the North Col, while Norton and Somerville got ready for the night. As it grew dark, they wondered, can a man sleep without oxygen at this height? Yes. It was the best night since I left Camp 1, Norton wrote. So at 6:45 next morning, the 2 men set out for the summit. They climbed slowly, taking 3 or 4 breaths for every step. They stayed a little below the ridge, to keep out of the wind. But in the shadow of the mountain, out of the sun, it was very cold. Norton shivered all the time, and he was having trouble with his eyes. Somerville coughed a lot, and his bad throat made it difficult to breathe. By midday, they were at 8,536 metres. The view was wonderful. They were above the clouds, with a sea of mountains below them. But Somerville was exhausted. His throat was worse. He could hardly breathe. So Norton went on alone. He was moving more and more slowly, on a steep slope, like the roof of a house. There were large stones and soft snow under his feet. It was easy to fall. And below him, 2,743 metres straight down, in the thin, clear air, was the East Rongbuk Glacier and Camp 3. He looked up. He was about 275 metres below the summit. But they were vertical metres measured up the mountain, not along it. But he was tired and moving very slowly, and his eyes were getting worse. Sometimes he saw 2 ice axes in his hand, not one. He knew that it was possible. He could get to the summit, but he could not get back. Norton was nearer the summit than any man before him. But at 8,575 metres, he decided to turn back towards Somerville. It was the right thing to do. Halfway down to Camp 5, Somerville stopped. There was something in his throat. For nearly a minute he could not breathe at all. Then he coughed up a ball of blood and could breathe again. When they reached Camp 4, Norton could not see at all. Chapter 7. Mallory and Irvine, 1924. But, to Norton's surprise, there were 2 more climbers at Camp 4, Mallory and Irvine. Mallory had decided to try again, with oxygen this time. Irvine was young, and he had not climbed many mountains, but he understood the oxygen equipment better than anyone. So Mallory decided to climb with him. On the 6th of June, they set out for Camp 5. 8 porters carried food and oxygen. Next day, they went on to Camp 6 with 4 porters. There, Mallory sent them back down with a note to Noel, who was filming the expedition. "Dear Noel, we'll probably start early tomorrow, 8th, in order to have clear weather. It won't be too early to start looking out for us, either crossing the rock band under the pyramid or going up Skyline at 8 p.m. Mallory wrote p.m. but meant a.m. Yours ever, G. Mallory. Behind them, Adele climbed up to Camp 5, with food to help them when they came down. Mallory left a note for him too, asking him to wait at Camp 4 the next evening. The weather was fine, he said, but the oxygen was very heavy to carry. Adele was climbing alone, without oxygen. He spent the night at Camp 5 and then climbed up towards Camp 6. At 7,900 metres, he found some very old rocks. Studying rocks was Adele's job, and the rocks that he found showed him that Everest had once been under the sea. At 12:50 p.m., the clouds cleared above him, and he could see the summit ridge of Everest. High on the ridge, he saw 2 tiny black dots moving on the snow. They climbed quickly to the top of a rock step near the summit. Then the clouds came back and they disappeared. It was Mallory and Irvine, climbing strongly towards the summit. But Adele thought they were a little late. Was there enough time for them to get to the summit and then down to Camp 6 that night? He climbed up to Camp 6 and left some food for them in the tent. Then he climbed higher towards the summit, calling out for them, but no one answered. He wondered what to do. He wanted to stay, but the tiny tent at Camp 6 was too small for 3 men. So, at 4:30 p.m., he went down. By 7 p.m., he was in Camp 4. The next day was the 9th of June. Adele was worried. When he looked up the mountain, he could see the tents of Camps 5 and 6, but nothing and nobody was moving. So Adele, with 2 porters, climbed up again to Camp 5. There was a strong wind all night. The porters shivered in their tent. And next morning they refused to move. So Odell went on alone, up to Camp 6. But no one was there. The tent was closed. The food was still there. Mallory and Irvine had disappeared. For 2 hours Odell climbed on, above Camp 6, towards the summit. What was he thinking? Mallory and Irvine were probably dead. But perhaps, just perhaps, one of them was still alive, badly injured up there. Perhaps he could see something, or find something, and return with some answers. But he saw nothing, and found no bodies. Sadly, he turned back. At Camp 6, he went into the tent and pulled out 2 black sleeping bags. He put them on the snow in the shape of a T. It was a message to the others, far below, that Mallory and Irvine were dead. But what happened to them? Did they reach the summit before they died? Or did they turn back, like Norton and Somerville? No one knows. When Odell last saw them, it was already 12:50 in the afternoon. But they were moving quickly, he said. So perhaps they went on to the summit, and then were too tired to find Camp 6 before dark. Perhaps, in the darkness, one of them fell, and the other died trying to help him. Perhaps they both fell together. Or, perhaps, with no more oxygen, they were just too cold and tired to move any more, and lay down in the snow to sleep. It was 75 years before some of these questions were answered.